Okay, so I'm Jeff Anshel. I'm an optometrist, and I'm probably the only one in the conference. Any other optometrists in the audience? No? Okay. So what's an optometrist doing at a CBD conference? Well, let's find out. First, a few things about myself. I'm in the advisory board for a couple of companies and a consultant for a few companies. One of those companies is CV Sciences. That is a CBD company based in Las Vegas. And they have a facility in San Diego, which is where I'm at. Also, I'm the founder and past president of the Ocular Nutrition Society. And we're a nonprofit organization that teaches eye doctors how to use nutrition to support eye health. And yes, it's more than just eating carrots. We talk about the real science behind eye health. And then on the editorial advisory board of a couple of the optometric journals. So we're going to be talking about eyes and eye health and things like that. So it's going to be a little bit complicated, but I'll try to get you back to your basic high school biology so that you get refreshed on how the eye and visual system work so that we're all on the same page and know what's going on in the eyes. So this is pretty much what everybody thinks about cannabis and in general, right? Reefer madness and the devil's weed and all that stuff. So it's starting to be rediscovered as what it is, which is an herb plant that grows and has medicinal benefits. So we're going to kind of wipe out some of these old concepts. But it is a Schedule I drug. Now I'm going to go through a lot of this stuff. You've all been to CBD lectures and you're familiar with cannabis, but just going to give you a general overview. So just to make sure that we know what we're doing. So Schedule I drugs, basically no medical benefit, high potential for abuse, restrictions on its use and availability, and also research is limited, and most funded research is to demonstrate harm. And the medical research relies on opportunity and reported street use rather than clinical use, and the medical studies are impacted, and we don't really know what the subject is doing in these drugs. So this is a list of the Schedule I drugs, and you can see they're pretty heavy hitters: heroin, LSD, peyote, ecstasy, all these. And the one that's also on the list is marijuana and cannabis. This is the one that doesn't really fit because it does have medical benefits, as we know. And the U.S. Patent Office agrees with us because there is an actual patent on cannabis, and this is the number. And since 2003, it's been available, and cannabinoids as antioxidants and neuroprotectants. So there's obviously a large discrepancy in what the public knows and what the government is saying and allowing. And basically, the big scare on cannabis is more of a political issue than it is a medical issue. And we'll go through some of this and show you how. And by the way, this is also from the Department of Human Health and Health and Human Services. So we know it's legitimate medical benefits from the cannabinoids. Briefly, a little history on this. Herbal medicine. Plants have been used for medicinal purposes for eons. That's how pharmaceuticals first came up, is through herbs. In the early 19th century, when chemical analysis first became available, scientists began to extract and modify the active ingredients from these plants to find out how these effects took place. Then they started making their own versions of these plant compounds, and that became pharmaceutical drugs. So about 1/4 of pharmaceutical drugs are derived from botanicals and from herbs. The constituents of cannabis, we know that there's a lot of different molecules, 480 known plant compounds. This number 66 is just one of the sources that I pulled up, because other sources say over 100 different cannabinoids. So there are a lot of different cannabinoid molecules in this plant. All right, the two main ones, obviously the THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, is the one responsible for the psychoactive effects. Does have analgesic and antioxidant properties. And the CBD has most of the medical benefits that we're talking about, non-psychoactive, and it does have ability to inhibit cancer cell growth. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So the receptors, obviously we have receptors in our brain, in our body for these different cannabinoids. So the two main ones, the CB1 receptors, are found mainly in the central nervous system in the brain, and not in the medulla oblongata, which is responsible for cardiovascular and respiratory systems. So there's really no chance that you're going to die from ingesting cannabis. You may feel like it, but it's not going to happen. All right, if you take too much, your brain goes nutso. But it is responsible for the euphoric and anticonvulsive effects. Now, I've done a lot of research in this, and what I found was, and this is the amazing part of this, the eyes are actually connected to the body through the brain. It's actually an extension of the brain. Who would have thunk that the eyes were actually part of it? Especially, when I first applied to optometry school back in the late 60s, I'm looking at this thing and going, wait a minute. They're spending 4 years studying just eyes? How's that possible? How are they going to fill up all that time? Well, my education on eye health started when I graduated optometry school. All right? That's just the basics in the 4 years of getting started. So we need to realize that the eyes are actually an integral part of the brain. So whatever affects the brain affects the eyes. That's what you have to realize. And then there's the CB2 receptors, which are more in the immune system, in the spleen, peripheral nervous system. There are some in the eye and central nervous system as well, just not as many. But they are responsible for the anti-inflammatory and other therapeutic effects. And so when we have a cell membrane here and we have a cannabinoid receptor here, the THC will fit into that receptor and you'll have these typical effects of the THC. But also the CBD can fill that void as well, and it does decrease the negative side effects of the THC. So there's a balancing out of the effects. So if you take up too much THC, you can take CBD to kind of mellow out the effects. So it's almost an antidote for THC. So we have this endocannabinoid system, this system in our bodies that responds to cannabinoids, and the two molecules are anandamide and 2-HE, and both of these are ultimately made from essential fatty acids. Now, if you look at the essential fatty acids that we have in our body, the structure that has the most fatty acids is actually in the brain and the central nervous system. So this kind of makes sense now. We're tying together these cannabinoids, endocannabinoids, with the nerve tissue and central nervous system. So again, this is very well connected. And typically it's from the analogs of the omega-6 fatty acids. We have omega-3 and omega-6. Those are the major fatty acids we have in our body. And I don't have the time to go through that whole thing. That in itself is a whole lecture about how these essential fatty acids affect our bodies and our eyes, but they do. And if anybody has dry eyes, that's part of the issue, is the essential fatty acids and how they affect the wetting of the front surface of the eye. And as we see here, you've probably seen this, CBD has one of the largest effects of all the cannabinoid molecules. And we look at antipsychotic, anti-epileptic, neuroprotective. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So we know that CBD has a lot of effects in the body. And when we break it down even further, if we, these are the different cannabinoid molecules and the different effects, and we see how they, affect different things in the body. And if you go to CBD, you'll see it will have the most physical effects. This is just half of the chart because this is the other half of the chart. So there's a lot of effects that happen. And again, on this side too, CBD has most of the effects. Okay, so that's it on the molecules of CBD, because I think most of you are pretty familiar with this stuff. Let's talk about the eye and get you back to your high school biology and how the eye works, and then we'll get into more details in it. So when light comes into the eye, the first thing it hits is the cornea. Well, kind of. it really hits the tear film first because there's tears covering the cornea. And if you're a woman over 40 or know of a woman over 40, more likely they have dry eyes because there's hormone receptors on the tear glands. And as women mature and their hormones change, the tearing changes in them. So the number one demographic for dry eyes is women over 40. And so the tears, if they're not uniform with each blink, if they vary with a thickness, the vision will come and go. So a lot of times I have people saying their vision comes and goes. They have to blink a lot. And what typically they have to do is get that tear film more stable, which is a challenge. But the cornea is the first physical surface of the eye. And that starts the focusing process because light coming in from the distance is parallel and would go straight through. Now it has to focus in about an inch. So it has to start focusing pretty quickly. That's why the cornea is more steeply curved than the rest of the eye. Sometimes too steeply curved, and the focal point is not here in the back of the retina, but too far up front. That's nearsightedness. In other words, the eyeball is effectively too long, or light's focusing too soon. So what do? Surgically, they reshape the eye to flatten it out, which is LASIK, and they move that focal point from here back to here, and you can see clearly. That's generally how LASIK works. All right, so the light comes through the cornea, starts the focusing process, and then it hits the pupil. And the pupil is nothing more than that black hole in the center of the colored iris of your eye. And the iris is here, and that pupil gets bigger and smaller depending on what your lighting is. So when you walk into the movie theater, the pupil gets real big. It takes your eyes a minute or so to adjust. And then when you go back outside, it's real bright, and your pupil gets real small to keep too much light from getting in the eye. So it's constantly changing depending on where you're looking at. And then the light goes through the lens. Now the lens is kind of it's a clear lens. Everything's clear. And it's actually the size and shape of an M&M. And it's a plain M&M, not the peanut, because they're different. And people know there's differences. And it's the consistency of an onion. And it's got these layers and layers of cells that are protein that continue to grow as you get older. So when you're young, your lens is kind of thin and you have a lot of flexibility in the lens because the muscles around it are contracting and allowing it to expand. That takes your distance vision and allows you to see up close. And then you relax it again, and then you go back out far. So you're going far and near with the lens inside your eye doing this kind of focusing. Well, it continues to grow as you get older. So where it's real thin when you're young, as you get older, it gradually gets thicker and thicker and thicker. Now it doesn't have quite as much oomph in it, right? So the muscles are still in good shape. It's just the lens is too thick. It doesn't focus as much. So when you're 10 years old, you can focus up here. Do you ever do that? Hey, Mom, look at this. And go, whoa. Can't see that. All right, because 10-year-olds can focus here, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. And what happens at 40? Your arms get too short. So it's really an arm problem. It has nothing to do with your eyes. All right? But people who are like 6, 7 and like to read out here don't have a problem until they're 50. Or some people who are doing fine detail work, like to work up here, they're going to have trouble in their late 30s. But typically a 16-inch working distance, 40-ish, is about when you'll notice it. Unless you're nearsighted, take your glasses off and boom, you can see perfectly clear up close. So there's no single way of seeing, but the focusing ability does decrease as we get older. And I can attest to that. That's what these are for. All right, so light continues to go through the eye into this clear gel into the center of the eye. And this gel, I say it's clear because light gets through it, but before you're born, there's blood vessels that grow right through it to feed the front of the eye here. And just before birth, all these blood vessels dissolve, in theory. Now, some pieces don't dissolve. So there's pieces of blood vessel, old cells, that are suspended in this clear gel here. And think of bananas in the Jell-O. There's the analogy. Okay, they're just suspended there. But as we get older, that gel starts to soften up a little bit. And these little pieces of cells start floating around. Floating and floating. What they do is they get close to the retina back here, and all of a sudden, boom, you look at a bright light and you see this floating thing in front of you. Anybody have floaters? Most of us do. So that's what floaters are. They don't get worse typically as you get older, they just get more visible as you get older. Because the softening of that gel, they move around more. I've seen them since I've been 6 or 7 years old myself, okay? But you'll notice them more when they're near the retina and you get a bright light in, it'll cast a shadow and you'll see them. Get used to them because there's nothing we can do about them. There goes George. Okay, I see it. Name him, give him a name. Okay. All right, so, and where it focuses is the retina. Now you'll notice there's a little dip in the back here. This little dip is called the macula, and that comes into play when you've heard of the disease called macular degeneration. Okay, the retina covers all the way from here all the way back around to this area. So 2/3 of the back of the eye is retina. But this is your 20/20 point right there. So when you look at something, you line it up with that spot right there. And then the light goes from there to the optic nerve that goes back to the brain. All right, this is where it's connected to the brain. So let's talk about some of the problems. And the number one problem that, the condition of why, marijuana was connected to the eye was for glaucoma. All right, so let's talk about that. Now, glaucoma is the death of the optic nerve, which is what I was just pointing to, usually due to excessive pressure inside the eye. And I'd like to highlight that usually, and we'll talk about that because typically we think that the classic model of glaucoma is the pressure gets too high inside the eye, it pushes on the back of the eye, compresses the retina, and doesn't allow the blood flow into the retina anymore, and you start losing vision. You start losing your blood supply to your retina. All right? So on the left, we have the normal eye, and we'll see, look up in the front part here. This is where the fluids get pumped into and drained out of the eye. Now, remember I said that these structures are transparent. We can't have blood vessels in most of the eye in the front here because light has to get through it. We can't see through blood. So the front part of the eye here gets nourished with a fluid that is produced in this little body right here. And it's drained right there. So it's produced here and then it gets drained out. So it's pumped in and drained out on a regular basis. Either too much gets pumped in or not enough gets drained out. The pressure starts going up, and here we have the pressure pushing on the back of the eye. Now, the white of the eye is pretty stiff. It's pretty firm. It's solid tissue. So it's resistant to the pushing. However, the optic nerve here is very soft nerve tissue. So it's more amenable to pressure changes. So when the doctor's looking into the eye from this way, this is what we see. We see the normal optic nerve here. We call it the optic disc because it looks like a disc. Okay, we see the outline of it here, and then we see a little whitish area in the middle here, which is a little, I kind of liken it to the palm of your hand. It's got a little bit of a dip in it. It's a disc with a little bit of a dip in it. All right, that's kind of normal. It's supposed to. All right, but when the pressure is too high for too long, that little dip turns into this. Okay, it's like you're pushing your finger into a balloon. You see that big deepening of it, and that's what this looks like. Okay, this is a deepening of the cup. It's called cupping. Okay, and that's what a glaucoma is. So it does a couple of things. It kind of compressing the optic nerve, compressing the retina, and keeping the blood flow from going into the eye. And the way the blood goes into the eye is from the back and around. And that's why you lose your peripheral vision first, because the blood can't get all the way around the back, the side of the eye. So I talked about, usually eye pressure, but there's two different conditions here. One's called ocular hypertension, where the pressure is high, but the optic nerve has a normal configuration. Okay. I mean, we like to see a certain number, of eye pressure, and some people have a higher pressure, but I look at the optic nerve, looks perfectly normal. And we test their side vision, and they're not losing any side vision. So they really just have ocular hypertension, not glaucoma. And then there's people who have normal eye pressure, and we look in the back of the eye, it's all kind of pushed out back there. What's going on there? Okay, and that's low tension glaucoma. So we can't just, glaucoma is not one thing we look at. It's kind of a syndrome of several different things we look at to see if the person's got normal vision. So back in the early 70s, there was a study done that showed that people who were smoking marijuana had a 25 to 30% decrease in IOP, is intraocular pressure. That's the pressure inside your eye. Lowering effect of smoking marijuana, and occurred in a small group. Now they thought that, how did this happen? Was it did it lower the inflow or increase the outflow of the fluids? They didn't know for sure. The problem with this study, it only lasted 3 to 4 hours. So somebody would have to stay, smoke every 3 to 4 hours. And some people are going, so? Well, what's the problem? Now, in 1970, I joined the Navy in 73 and started active duty in 75. And that's when this hit the media, was in the mid-70s. And we had a line out the door of Navy recruits wanting to know if they had glaucoma. It was the hottest topic going. You sure I don't have it, Doc? Really? Can you test again to make sure? So anyway, it was the biggest thing. So this study showed 2 hours after sublingual administration. So this was, an oral type of thing. And that's my thought too. It's like, well, you know that if you intake cannabis orally, it takes longer to take effect and the effect lasts longer. So I'm thinking, well, maybe if we, have people eating cannabis more, it would last longer. They wouldn't have to smoke every 3 to 4 hours. Didn't matter. So IOP was temporarily reduced. But the big thing in this study, CBD did not reduce the IOP at any time. So CBD does not reduce eye pressure like THC does. However, remember, it's not just about eye pressure. It's about nerve death and, blood flow. And so there's antioxidant effects and neuro-protective effects of CBD. So I would still say, yeah, it's probably a good thing to be taking CBD for eye health, even if you have glaucoma. And the reason being that there are CB1 receptors in the front of the eye, CB1 and CB2 receptors in the retina, all throughout the retina, and CB2 receptors in the optic nerve itself. So we know that these CB receptors have neuro effects in the eye. And if we didn't believe me, you got to believe Dr. Oz. And glaucoma made the list. All right. So let's talk about macular degeneration. Now, we talked about the macula being that 20/20 point in the back of your eye. So that degenerates. That's the area that requires, that's what you're looking at on a regular basis. So that's your sharpest vision. And it's also the most highly sensitive area. And when as soon as you open your eyes, you're using that macular area to see whatever you're looking at. And see the rods and cones in the back of the eye, very highly reactive, highly metabolically active, and so much so that they kind of burn out. So what happens is they break off little pieces and shuttle those pieces out of the eye to the bloodstream and then regenerate themselves on a regular basis. But those rods and cones have to, regenerate themselves for a long time, hopefully 80 or more years. Okay, and remember, we were only designed to last about, 25 or 30 years. That's how old the Homo sapiens lived back in the early days, Paleolithic days, right? So now we're really pushing the limits of how long the rods and cones can react, effectively. So let's take a look here. Now, when I look into the eye, the doctor looks into the eye, here's your optic nerve, and this is called the fovea is actually the center section of the macula. The macula is about 1 millimeter wide, and then the fovea is the very central portion of that macula. All right? And it kind of looks like this on a regular basis. Okay? We see the blood vessels coming through. These are feeding the back of the eye. These are lying on top of the retina. If you want to see these blood vessels yourself, it's really cool. Just take a little pen light or a little flashlight or your phone, get into a very dark room, and just come in from the side, and that pattern of blood vessels will shift over, and boom, you'll see them. little party trick. Okay, anyway. It's like seeing the inside of your eye. Now, in macular degeneration, in macular degeneration, okay, AMD, age-related macular degeneration. Your optic nerve actually still looks pretty good, but look at all these white dots all over the place here, okay? Now this one, it's not macular degeneration because the macula doesn't really have any, but it's starting, you can tell what these white dots are going. These are called drusen, okay? And what happens is these drusen start developing in this area here. This is the macular area in the drusen form. This is the dry form of macular degeneration. I'll show you another picture of that in a second. Eventually, it becomes wet, and that's when you can tell it's distorted in this area here, and that's fluids leaking in. All right, so let's go through how this process works. We get these drusen. This is the light coming through into the eye this way. These are the rods and cones. And this is the back layer of the retina. And this is the membrane in the back of the retina, very back membrane. Now, again, these parts of the rods and cones break off. They shuttle through this membrane into the blood system and then out into the trash. Okay? Now, what happens is we get these drusen are build up in this membrane. And what it does is it blocks off the communication between the rods and cones and the blood vessels. So the body says, I got to get nutrition to the retina. How am I going to do it? It's getting blocked off by these pieces. And could be hundreds of these or thousands of these in the retina. So what happens is the blood vessels, the body will actually call on it's called neovascularization, which is new blood vessels, and grow new blood vessels to feed the retina. The problem is these blood vessels are weak and they leak. And we get all this fluid coming into the area, and it wipes out these nerve endings and the rods and cones and distorts them. So one of the things we test for is called an Amsler grid. It's like a piece of graph paper, all these lines, cross-hatch of lines. As you look at the center of it, you will see distortions off to the side a little bit. And that'll indicate the distortion of the rods and cones up here. So again, and the key here is that we have CB2 receptors in this membrane in the back of the eye. So that tells me that CB2 receptors have some, and that's what we're looking at is how does this process start? All right, and what we're finding is it's starting back in this membrane, because this membrane is the one that actively transports nutrients and waste products back and forth in and out of the eye. And if there's CB2 receptors in there, they have to have some effects. Adam! Crap. I should have had him tell me this. That's most of it. I got a few. Well, let me take questions while we're waiting for Adam. Any questions? Yes, sir.
On the dry eye, you talked about the omega fatty acids.
Right.
Is that something you prescribe to your patients?
Yeah, all the time. But I don't use, typically a lot of doctors will just use fish oil. And it takes longer to take effect and it's not fully as effective. I use a product that has some fish oil in it, but it also has a good balance of omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. So it kind of does both. And the product is called BioTears, and and I get, like where fish oil can take 3 to 4 months to take effect, typically I get results in 30 days. No, it's a pill. Yeah, 2 pills with breakfast, 2 at dinner, and people get results. And
The doctor just tells me to use eye drops.
well, typically, and there's a lot of different drops that we can use to do that, but most people don't like using eye drops. Yeah, nobody. I mean,
You get dependent on it.
well, depending on which ones you're using, but don't use Visine or anything like it. All right, no eye whiteners because they hook you. There is a new one out though, I have to admit. It's called Lumify by Bausch & Lomb, and it actually works in a minute, and last 8 hours. Kind of amazing. All right, so I lost my... Okay, all right, thanks. So any other questions? I only have a few more slides to go here, but... All right, well, I might as well tell you now that I've written a couple of books on it. This is the Bible, Smart Medicine for Your Eyes. It's got everything you need to know about your eyes. Took me a little while to get it all down. There's that. And my latest one is What You Must Know About Age-Related Macular Degeneration. Password.
My computer died. Or is it the password?
Yeah.
That's weird. I turned that off.
Well, I thought it did. But
No, yeah, my computer's dead. I was running to get the charger.
Oh, okay. So yeah, if you want, you can go. They're both available on Amazon. So you can just, type my name in there. Yes, ma'am.
So the biospheres, is that what you give to someone who's over the age of 40, like you said?
Anybody who's got dry eyes, basically. You don't have to be 40. You could be 25 like you and take it, no problem.
So is that basically what's going on when you said you have to blink to kind of start focusing?
That's one of the possibilities. Typically, it's the first thing when someone says they're doing that. I mean, it could be an allergy that's causing the drying of the eyes, but typically it's kind of the other way. The dry eyes will lend itself to more allergic reactions. There's 3 layers to the tears. There's a mucus layer that holds it to the eyeball. Then there's the watery layer in the middle, and then there's a lipid or fatty layer in the front that keeps it from evaporating too quickly. And that fatty layer comes from glands inside your eyelids. And so, if those glands aren't working properly, then that lipid layer won't be solid, and it breaks up, and tears evaporate. So that's where you kind of have to keep blinking to try to refresh that lipid layer. And that's about 90% of the dry eye is that. Sometimes, and then people come in with watery eyes, and I test them out, and guess what? They have dry eyes. And they can't figure that out. It's like, wait a minute, my eyes are too dry. My eyes are too wet. How come you said I have dry eyes? It's because the brain is connected to the tear gland that flushes the eye, for onions and crying. So when it senses that it's too dry, it signals the tear gland to flush the eye. So and my own brother was in the office, tear running down his cheek. I said, what's going on? He goes, oh, it does that on a regular basis. So I got him the dry eye product, cleared it up. So it works pretty well. There's another question? Yeah, ma'am.
Is anybody that you're aware of doing any testing with CBD and its binding to the CB1 and CB2 receptors?
Not in the United States that I'm aware of. There is some, and actually I had a slide on it. There's somebody in Israel that's doing some studies on dry eyes and CB2, because what's one of the side effects of THC? Dry mouth, dry eyes. Yeah, so it affects those glands that produce those mucoids. So CB2 being an anti-THC, it'll have some effect. So the challenge is getting it through the eye because it's a fat soluble, and you need something that's more water soluble to get it through the lipid layers. So it's a challenge, but there's people working on it. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So I was understanding how CBD, that we have the receptors for the macular degeneration, but you were speaking earlier how they found that only marijuana was effective for glaucoma.
Right.
Can you explain why? Because you were explaining.
Well, if you noticed in the front of the eye, there was the red stars, and those are CB1 receptors. So the production and drainage of the fluids in the front of the eye, that's all CB1.
Okay.
Yeah, but the CB2 is in the back of the eye.
Okay.
And there's some CB1s in the back of the eye as well, but yeah, most of the CB2s are in the... Okay, what did I do with the clicker? That's okay. Oh, thank you. I got sidetracked. Okay. All right, so this is the neovascularization I talked about, the growing of new blood vessels. And these cannabinoids restrict the sprouting of blood vessels. Now, this is in cancer and brain tumors. So with wet macular degeneration, we get this growing new blood vessels in the back of the eye trying to feed the retina, right? And so this is uncontrolled. So what the only treatment for macular degeneration is for wet, and the treatment is to shoot an anti-cancer medication into the back of the eye. Fortunately, they don't go through the front where all the pain receptors are. They go through the top, they numb you out, inject it. Now you feel a little bit of pressure, but it's not like sticking a needle in your eye. Okay, it's a medical procedure. But what it does is it immediately flattens out the retina again from all that swelling. So it works pretty well for about 4 to 6 weeks. And then back to the doctor for another shot. Yeah, so I wouldn't call it a cure by any means. So, but again, we get the cannabinoids are anti-cancer, and they're shooting a cancer drug into the eye. So the same rationale is, can be followed for doing this with cannabis. So I'm thinking they're going to eventually be doing some cannabinoid research on reducing macular degeneration, late stage. And neuroprotection, and here we have CBD exerting a neuroprotective, antioxidant, anti-death toxicity, and cannabidiol is involved in the signaling pathway for neuroprotection. So again, CBD affecting the nerves and protecting the nerves. And here's the dry eye thing. And this is the guy who actually discovered the CB1, CB2 receptors. Yeah, okay, and it's in the Hebrew University in Israel. And it's basically, they've got this new drug that they're working on that has anti-inflammatory effect. And that's what, inflammation is a big part of dry eyes. So that's what they're looking at right now to resolve dry eyes. So we all know about hemp and how versatile it is, and as a food. This is stuff you're probably very familiar with. The hemp seed oil, which is awesome because it's 80% essential fatty acids. And again, this is something that could be very beneficial for dry eyes and just eye health in general. And it's also anti-carcinogenic. So, and it's very, it's a complete protein, a lot of amino acids. So hemp seed oil is excellent. This is the breakdown of it. And what it does have is, when we look at, some sources say that, omega-3s are good because they are anti-inflammatory. Omega-6s are bad because they're pro-inflammatory, which is true, but some omega-6s are also anti-inflammatory, especially for the mucus anti-inflammatory. So what you look at is a 4-to-1 ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 to omega-3, and that's what's available in the hemp seed oil. So that's one of the reasons it's got some potential as a dry eye product as well. There's the essential fatty acids. Again, the GLA is what I just mentioned. This is the omega-6, mucus-specific anti-inflammatory. And so essential fatty acids, optimal brain health. Again, most of the fatty acids in the brain are DHA, which is an omega-3, and it's very important. So the total plant complex is very important in, good derived from hemp. And then, we need to remember that, the hemp oil, the 3.3% THC versus the higher amounts of CBD versus the marijuana oil, which is totally different. And again, the myriad of uses of hemp these days. So this is my front window of my office. And the one thing, I'm an eye doctor and got all this stuff on glasses and contact lenses and eye health. And the one thing that draws people in, the CBD. People are interested in it. And the CBD for eye health. So, the brochures here, I talk about how important, it is for nerve protection and how important the eyes are to brain health. So that's it. So if you have a headache, back in 2000 BC, it says here, eat this root. In 1000 AD, it was, that root is heathen, say this prayer. 1850 AD, that prayer is superstition, drink this potion. 1940, it was that potion snake oil, swallow this pill. 1985, that pill is ineffective, take this antibiotic. And now it's that antibiotic is artificial, here, eat this root. We've gone full circle, okay? So again, this is the company I work with, Plus CBD at the CV Sciences. They have a full line of products. They're not even here at the show, so I don't have a problem talking about them. All right, but if you want to, check into them, they have, again, seed to sale. That's their motto as well. They're very, very good company. And thank you for your attention.